Namaskar. Acharya Charak says, Tadvidya Sambhasha Jnanavardhananam Sreshta. Today, we are hosting this Sambhasha with our mentor, Professor M.S. Valiathan, sir. Sir, thank you very much for your presence and valuable time. We launched this Journal of Ayurveda and Integrative Medicines special issue on Ayurvedic Biology. And for this special issue, our journal's editorial board member, Kalpana ma'am, interviewed Valiathan sir. And that was a great interview that we are going to soon read in JIM special issue. We also thought that this interaction should go live, and hence we organized today's webinar. I request our mentor, Professor Patwardhan sir, to say a few words as opening remarks. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Girish. And first of all, let me welcome and thank Professor M.S. Valiathan, who has actually helped me in shaping my thoughts and changed my way to look at Ayurveda, you know. And although I may have met him sometime in 2001, 2002, during the Nimitli monitoring committee, which he was involved in, you know, I remember my teacher and mentor, Professor P.V. Sukhatme, when we were establishing Interdisciplinary School of Health Sciences, Professor Sukhatme told me that you must meet Professor M.S. Valiathan. And at that time, you know, this was something late 90s, Professor Sukhatme had told us that while establishing this health science, he said that research in health sciences will not be complete at the School of Health Sciences unless you involve scientists like Professor M.S. Valiathan. But I had an opportunity to meet him in person only in 2001 when we were part of the CSIR's Nimitli program on herbal drug research, of which, as I told you, Professor Valiathan was a member of the monitoring committee. Right in the first meeting of this monitoring committee, you know, we were so glad to interact with him. And Professor Valiathan, I must tell you that earlier to this meeting with you, I was looking at Ayurveda only from point of view as a discovery engine for new drugs. And my way to look at Ayurveda was mostly about medicinal plants. But you opened my eyes and broadened my vision, you know, to look at Ayurveda from more broader point of view. And I must, I thank you immensely for this, what you did for me. You actually changed my entire thinking pattern and mind. Later on, we discussed with him. After this, you know, we started thinking, and Dr. Kalpana was there with us, Dr. Arvind Chopra was there with us. And then with our cohort of rheumatoid arthritis, we did a small study on understanding genetic basis to Prakriti. And at that time also, we were interacting with Professor Valiathan and take his inputs, you know. This led to the new area, which we that time started talking about AYUSH genomics. But this was not over. When 2003, Dr. Valiathan came to Pune, you know, and gave us an opportunity to launch his book, one of the most astonishing book, a remarkable book on Ayurveda, I would say, Legacy of Charaka. And later on, he came out with Legacy of Sushruta and Vagbhata as well. But the first book which we launched in Pune, and we still remember remember interacting with him during the book launch. That was such a enriching experience. Followed by that, I remember again meeting him in the function of the Indian Academy of Sciences, in which he invited me to share thoughts. And that was on Ayurvedic biology, when he came out with a decadal vision for the academy. And it was published in 2006. This was followed by a science initiative in Ayurveda, or ASIIA, which was hosted by principal scientific advisor at that time was Professor Chidambaram. And then it all opened up the entirely new era, and it compelled modern scientists to look at Ayurveda from different perspectives. Earlier to that, I must say, before Dr. Valiathan came out with this science initiative in Ayurveda, modern scientists were not really very much open to look at Ayurveda from science point of view, but he changed that perspective. And then we were also part of it, this ASI project of PSA, as one of the collaborator with Dr. Kalpana Joshi and Dr. Satyamurthy and Thangaraj and others, all over the all over India. So this and there were several other components of this interesting program, which Professor Valiathan will be talking about. But most importantly, this Ayurvedic biology program was conceived in such a way to attract modern scientists, cutting-edge research who are doing, to look at Ayurveda from a different perspective, and which was very much successful. I must tell you that Professor Valiathan has already published the first decadal story of this program, which is published in the academy proceedings, followed by that the interesting interview which Dr. Kalpana Joshi has taken. I am so happy, Dr. Valiathan, that your idea of Ayurvedic biology has taken strong roots now, and institutions like Transdisciplinary University and Jawaharlal Nehru University have already started programs in teaching, because once it comes in teaching curriculum, then the roots become stronger, and few other universities also have taken lead from that. And I am sure, and I must assure you on this occasion, that this Ayurvedic biology concept, which you have sowed seeds of, we all are committed to continue its growth, and we will be really doing all our efforts in that direction, so that it flourishes under your guidance. I would end my talk, because we all are eager to listen to him, but I would like to end by quoting him in his book, The Legacy of Charaka. And this is one of my most favorite quote, which I quote in most of my lectures. Ayurveda owes its call not to selfish goal or worldly pleasure, but to compassion for fellow beings. In seeking to know my legacy, you have but seen the leaves of a universal tree, too vast for your eyes. May your sight grow and your quest never end. Thank you, Dr. Valiathan, again for joining us in this very interesting session. Namaskar. Jai.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. The picture at your background really represents Ayurveda biology. There are Vaidya, pharmacologist, scientist, Dr. Satyamurthy, Vaidya Gangadharanji, and yourself and Professor Valiathan, sir. This particular interaction has really begun with Ayurveda biology. The one who is continuously engaged in this endeavor is Professor Kalpana Joshi. Kalpana ma'am is active in Ayurveda biology research for last 2 decades, right from biogenomics, Ayurveda-based pharmacogenomics, research on Rasayana, and many other concepts. I think ma'am has several projects related to this concept. A molecular biologist herself, she is a truly scientist working in the interdisciplinary domain. I request ma'am that we can start the interview. Over to you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, Girish, for such warm introduction. And thank you, Dr. Patwardhan, for just initializing it in such a lovely manner. So good evening, all. Thank you for joining us today. As sir mentioned, 10 years back, I had opportunity to interact with Dr. our mentor, Professor Valiathan. And later on, it was published in JIM as Insights into Ayurveda Biology, a conversation with Professor Valiathan. So today I am absolutely delighted to have another chance to have a dialogue with Honorable Professor Valiathan. So, sir, with your permission, should we start, Valiathan sir?
Yes, certainly.
So I would like to put my first question here for you. What were the circumstances for the genesis and growth of Ayurveda biology?
Before I answer the question, I must first of all express my profound thanks to Dr. Patwardhan. He's a good friend, a companion. We have been together for many years, shared our thoughts. It's a great delight for me to be here to take part in this discussion meeting. The whole idea of Ayurvedic biology, it dates back to 2004. There was a meeting of the Indian Academy of Sciences in Benares, and Professor T.V. Ramakrishnan was the president. He is an eminent physicist. So I had to give a talk there, and I mainly talked about the interaction of Ayurveda with modern science from historical point of view. It started with the 16th century Garcia de Orta, a Portuguese physician practicing in Goa for many years. He wrote a book which first brought Indian medicinal plants to the awareness of Europeans. From then 17th century, the Van Riet's great book, Hortus Malabaricus, 12 volumes in Greek, in Latin, on medicinal plants on the western coast of India. That from then on, it was taxonomy to the 18th century, 19th century, even part of 20th century. Even today, there is taxonomy. That dominated the approach of science to Ayurveda. And then came natural products chemistry, pharmacology with Ramnath Chopra. So all these were happening through these centuries. Then 20th century, of course, you will agree, the most outstanding development, revolutionary, that was the double helix. So medicine itself is being viewed through the molecular point of view, from that dimension. So it was natural that the new approach to Ayurveda would be through molecular biology. So that is, when we talk about Ayurvedic biology, essentially we are looking at concepts or mechanism of procedures and so on through the tools, through the point of view of molecular biology. That is how, so after my lecture, Professor Ramakrishnan asked me whether I would write this as a document. There is some echo here. So I wrote that document, which was published by the Indian Academy of Sciences in 2006 as Towards Ayurvedic Biology. That's where it began, historically.
Sir, you have become mute. Sir, you have become mute.
Yes, I think now it is visible and.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we are able to hear you, sir.
Okay.
That was a very good background, which is now set for talking about Ayurveda biology. Dr. Patwardhan mentioned about Manipal Academy of Higher Education, CCMB and IISc, and then we always talk about Aryavaidyashala, Kottakkal. So many renowned institutions and scientists were involved in Ayurveda biology. So my next question is, what was the initial response from Ayurveda professionals, institutions, and scientific community to your initiative?
See, when that original document, I had indicated 5 areas which in Ayurveda in terms of concepts, procedures, and so on, which would lend themselves to study through molecular biology. 5 areas had been identified. One of them is the genomic basis of dosha prakriti, for example. Another was rasayana, testing the metabolic and immunologic effects of rasayanas in animals, in Drosophila. That was another project. Or the microstructure of plasmas, like that, or mechanism of action of panchakarma, like that. 5 projects, some areas have been identified. And so to take up this, we need scientists with very modern facilities in their laboratory. We need Ayurvedic physicians to cooperate with them. Now, this was my effort. So initially, when I started, about a year, I spent going around giving lectures in 10 scientific institutions, including GAFR, Indian Institute of Science, all the top institutions, CCMB, talking about this new approach to Ayurveda through science. And I wanted to see I was testing the waters. What would be the acceptability of this? And also 2 Ayurvedic institutions, including one quoted. I found there was a terrific response, very great interest, lots of questions. In fact, TIFR was the longest, 45 minutes of questions. So I realized the time was right to take this initiative. That's where we started. But when the response of the official, that was different. Because when you talk to people in authority, whether it is health ministry, whether it is DBT, science and technology, what I found was they were profoundly skeptical. But this was disguised as a great deal of praise for Ayurveda. Everybody would praise Ayurveda. It is our great heritage. We should do everything to preserve it, to develop it, and so on. All these sentiments are expressed. But when it comes to doing something, very little was done. This was my experience. I was very discouraged. That was the time Dr. Chidambaram, who is a neutron physicist, incidentally, nothing to do with medicine, he happened to read this document of the Indian Academy. He told me, you have indicated 4 or 5 areas for possible research. We can do some pilot funding. I'm not a funding agency, but the rules do permit me to explore these new areas. So if you can find the good investigators, do these pilot projects, I can do the initial funding. And if the results are encouraging, some funding agency, let us hope, will take it. That's the beginning. If Dr. Chidambaram had not shown that foresight, I think this whole idea would have been dead on arrival. I can tell you that. That's how it started.
Yes, sir. I was very fortunate to be part of these initial projects. And I worked from Pune, of course, with guidance of Dr. Bhushan Patwardhan and the team members. And remember my interaction with Dr. Satyamurthy and Dr. Thangaraj and Dr. Kundaya. And under your leadership, we had several brainstormings and training sessions from CDAC. So that was very wonderful time to take this project ahead. Sir, could you please now let us know on some of the major projects done under Ayurveda Biology and their outcomes as such?
In fact, I would take the project you referred to. In fact, your group, Valiathan, yourself, you had published a paper on the HLA polymorphism and Prakriti. That paper was published in 2005, I think. That had a great influence. Many people read that. I had also read that. So this was the first project that we did, where you were also an investigator. So was Bhushan Patwardhan. That was on the genomic basis of dosha prakriti. That really followed in the footsteps which you laid earlier. And that project, I would say, is central. It took 4 years to do that. It involved a number of institutions. Pune, you were here. Then Hyderabad CCMB was involved. The Indian Institute of Science was involved. Kondaya, Ayurvedic institution, Gangadharan's FRLHD in Bangalore, and Manipal, of course. So we had a number of institutions, 4 years, and we had 3,000 subjects. We initially screened to reduce it to 900. It's a massive exercise. And that definitely showed that there is a genomic basis to Ayurvedic phenotypes of Vata, Pitta, Kapha. There was even a gene for Pitta that was identified. So that was so personalized medicine seems to have a scientific basis. This was one of the major studies which was published in Nature Scientific Reports and in 2015. And they wrote to me that in the 2015, out of the most cited 100 papers, this was one of them. So that certainly had some influence on the scientific basis of an Ayurvedic concept. That was one. Another was the effect of rasayanas, widely used, but there is no scientific evidence that we can use. We cannot say the patient that people are feeling better. That's not evidence. So how do you find this? So we had two models. One was Kalluri Subbarao, he's no more, but he had worked for many years on aging. And his way of doing the aging studies were the measure the chain breaks, single chain and double chain breaks in the brain, neurons, and astrocytes mainly. And this he was doing in rats for many years. So I asked Kalluri Subbarao whether he would consider treating one group with pre-treat with rasayanas and see what happens. He readily agreed. That was the first paper which came. It is Science Initiative in Ayurveda. He published in a very good journal in aging. That showed very clearly his measurements were at 3 months, 9 months, and 15 months. And all these, the chain breaks were significantly reduced in the pre-treated animals. And that was a very important. So the stability of DNA was much greater in those treated with rasayana. That was the first paper. And subsequently, this paper was seen by Lakhotia in Banaras, who is our high priest in Drosophila genetics. He wanted to try this in Drosophila model. And that number of papers have come in PLOS One, very good journals. And he showed that the lifespan of Drosophila increased, thermal tolerances increased, starvation tolerances increased, fecundities increased, number of things. And also the genetically modified flies for Huntington's and Parkinson's, both of them, the deterioration was arrested by giving this rasayana. So there were very excellent findings. And the third one, I don't want to go into details, the third example is the microstructure of asthmas. As you know, there is great concern about use of mercury. Mercury is banned in modern medicine. We would never think of using mercury. Even dentistry is not allowed. But here in Ayurveda, I talked to Dr. P.K. Warrior at that time. He said, yes, we use versus and loop, not often, but we don't see these kidney problems at all. This is what he told. So how do you explain this riddle? So one could be microstructure, which had not been studied. Simply looking at chemistry, mercury is there, so you can't use it. So this microstructure was studied for us by Devadatta Lahiri in BARC, Bombay. It took a long time to find somebody who would do this. And they showed conclusively, it was published in Journal of Synproton Radiation, a very top journal in the field, showing that the nanotransformation is taking place. There are no toxic forms of mercury in the final syndrome. And the ancient method of producing this in Kotak that they did for us is just as good as the modern methods that they were using to mercury sulfide. So just 3 examples. There are many others on Panchakarma, for example. I won't go into all that. But this was enough to tell you that this is a very richly rewarding area for scientific work.
So that was very exciting to know. Bhasma worked upon at IITs and Kapha, Pitta, Vata, DNAs, Prakriti's DNAs were sequenced at CCMB. So based on how these projects were done, may I ask you, what are your observations on the implementation of projects in Ayurvedic biology and the possibility of their notice at the international level?
Here I have I have to share some disappointment because even though these papers, I think altogether, now there may be some 30 papers published from the time we started in this Ayurvedic biology by different groups all over India. But my disappointments come from the following. One, where the group has done a project and there are some leads in that project. there is no subsequent follow-up. I expect a project to come from them or from some other scientists that they would have project arising out of this. That is how science grows, ramified. But that doesn't happen here. If the project is done, paper is published, that's the end of it. There is no follow-up. That was a great disappointment. And they said that way I cannot see it growing. The second is those who have done work in these projects, published in the top journals, they're getting a PhD, including one from Manipal. They can't get jobs. So they end up working for an industry or something else, which has nothing to do with Ayurvedic biology or science applied to Ayurveda. In spite of my making efforts to have a career development fellowship from the DST and all that, nothing could be done. So we were training people and losing them. So there is no way we could build an institutional base for this discipline. That was a major disappointment. And what we were getting towards my years as the chairman of the task force in Ayurvedic Biology, we used to get around 70 projects a year. And the majority of them, I'm afraid, they were not hypothesis based. It was not a concept being examined, being asked, interrogated. Most of them are the same pattern. Here is a rasayana, or here is a ghruda or something, which has been used in Ayurveda for thousands of years. And it is used for A, B, C, D. Now we want to analyze this, characterize this, and for that we need essentially a molecular biology lab. Nothing is less than 1 crore. Now this is really not science, because there are more than 1,500 formulations in Ayurvedic texts. You can do this for all these, endless. That is not science. This kind of analysis like a ghruda or something, it is justifiable if an industry comes and says, we are thinking of producing this. So we would like to have all this information. Yes, you do it on contract basis for useful information to the industry. I can justify that. But in a science initiative, this is not good science. So I used to reject all of them. So in fact, a time came, 10 years I was the chairman of the task force under DST. I found these were all problems which I was not able to solve. Ayurveda institutions, that is another big disappointment. There was not a single project where an Ayurvedic institution was the primary investigator. We insisted all projects should have an Ayurvedic collaborator, otherwise we won't accept those proposals. So nominally, they will have an assistant professor from an Ayurvedic college who had not done any work in this area. His name will be there, nominally. But there was not a single project from any Ayurvedic institution. So I suggested to DST at that time, I think this task force needs a new leader. I even suggested Bhushan as the next chairman. I don't know the current status of that task force.
Yes, like we received very big support from Office of PSA. So I wanted to ask you that this big support from Office of PSA as well as task force in Ayurveda Biology, where you were the chairman under DST and SERB. So what was the impact this support made in the scientific community?
It made, as you heard from Prof Patwardhan a short while ago, it had a big impact because we had no forum in India where Ayurvedic physicians and scientists could interact. There was no platform, no place where they could meet and discuss. Even, for example, take a place like CDR, developing drugs. So the Ayurvedic place there is almost nil. They take a formulation mentioned in an Ayurvedic text. Thereafter, the whole work is done by phytochemists and so on. So there was no interaction between scientists and Ayurvedic physicians. That for the first time that we broke that barrier. Every project in this Ayurvedic biology, every project that we conducted, we had Ayurvedic physicians, we had scientists. Not too many medical people. Every project. Similarly, the monitoring committee, for all these projects, there was a monitoring committee. They would meet once or twice during the progress of investigations. We always set up an Ayurvedic physician in the monitoring committee. All the papers published, they were co-authors. So we gave them the due respect for participation. And that, I think, breaking that barrier was certainly a contribution that was made by this initiative.
Sir, now I want to slightly go away from Ayurveda biology and ask you some question on your books. All your books, like Legacy of Charaka or say Brihatrayi, Introduction to Ayurveda and Ayurvedic Inheritance, a Reader's Companion. So these books are great sources of knowledge for all of us. Like we have never studied Sanskrit. So these are the books which we could read and understand Ayurveda. So you have, I wanted to ask you, or could you please tell us your experience as an author? Because I remember you telling us that you studied Charaka Samhita initially with Sri Raghavan Thirumal Pad and Kerala, like in Gurukul system. And then later on, he said that you will not take so much time at Charaka for Sushruta and Vagbhata. And then later on, you also studied both whole of Brihatrayi and then wrote your books. So we would like to know what is your experience as author, as an author.
In 2000, my life, 2 centuries. I have first the 20th century, 40 years I spent in surgery or surgical investigations, 40 years. So the new century, 21st century, 20 years I have been a student of Ayurveda. So in 2000, when I decided to study Ayurveda, I chose Charaka Samhita as my text. And my teacher, you need an acharya under whom you have to learn. You cannot learn on your own. So I chose Raghavan Thirumal Pad. He's a very famous person in Kerala, in his 80s, a very great scholar, practicing physician, a great teacher, and easily accessible. But he was very surprised to see a 65-year-old surgeon and wanting to come and learn Ayurveda. But we got along very well. He accepted me very gracefully. I had to go, he used to live in a small place called Chalakudi, which is not far from Kochi. So I was living in Manipal. So our plan was every 2.5 to 3 months I would go there. And we would have pre-arranged that, say, certain 1 or 2 chapters or 4 chapters, depending on the length of the chapter, I would be prepared, and he would also know that I'd be coming to discuss those. So I would tell him what I understood from these verses 1 to 10, let us say, and he would listen very patiently. He would explain, he would correct, he would shorten or lengthen. So he would, and also go into discussion of his experiences, some related areas, which was a great education for me. And this was a wonderful experience. So in 2.5 years, I would go like this regularly. And we covered the 120 chapters of Charaka Samhita. And sometimes the kind of depth of discussions, listening to him in a very simple, not at all authoritative, very simple, gentle kind of speaking. I have sometimes felt this is Charaka reborn, sitting before me and explaining this to me. I would get that feeling. He could induce that to me. He was really an acharya. So when he finished, he read through my draft. He was very pleased. He wrote an appreciative note, which I translated and which is published in the text. But he also told me, now you should not stop with this. Brihatrayi, there are 2 more, Sushruta and Vagbhata. You should write that also, but you won't need my help to do that. This was his blessing. So that was a great experience for me. So the first 2003, the Legacy of Charaka, as you heard from Bhushan, was released in Pune. And that was an encouragement because Pune is a Punya Bhumi. It's a great thing to come here, a place of learning, place of traditional learning. So we all have veneration for this city of Pune. So I was very pleased that this was done. And the next was the Legacy of Sushruta. That was again released in Pune by Dr. Marshelkar. And the third was Legacy of Vagbhata. That was released in Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, by Pradha Narasimha. Very great physicist, mathematician. So that was the story of these three books. And the last one which you mentioned, Ayurvedic Inheritance, that was based on 20 lectures I gave for the NPTEL. There is a national program for technology enhanced learning, which is run by the IITs under the Ministry of Education, Government of India. So 5 or 6 IITs got together. They started this some 15 years ago for engineering colleges, which are very poor at teaching, library and so on. The whole syllabus of the ICT for technology education, they have given in the form of video lectures, very high quality. And these are open access. Anybody can take it. They can listen to it in the hostel as long as they have a laptop. Now this program is very popular. I think they have some 100,000 hits for this program, even outside India. Now that program, once the director of Madras IIT, we were chatting in an airport, then he asked me, we have started a general section here, liberal arts, we cannot ignore that. Can you give a course of 20 lectures on introduction to Ayurveda? So I gave those lectures. And then our Manipal University Press, they asked me, sir, you have not published anything by our press. So why don't you publish it here? So the lectures you cannot publish like that. You have to write. So based on those lectures, I wrote this book, Ayurvedic Inheritance, a Reader's Companion. So that was the last.
Yes,
I thoroughly enjoyed my life as an author. It was a great experience.
We too enjoyed your NPTEL lectures, as well as your writing is so lucid that it makes it very interesting and easy read, like any other fictional book. You just go on reading it and like you get knowledge also. So that was very nice. Now I'm also going to change slightly. Sir, there are some requests that they want you to speak more loudly so that they will be able to hear better. Some chat messages are there.
Okay. Okay.
This is the online session. So we are into this online session mostly because of Corona or say COVID-19 pandemic.
Right.
Last 1.5 years, we were going through the challenging situation, pandemic situation. So I would like to know, there are so many efforts by so many Ayurveda pharmacies to bring in Ayurveda drugs in market for therapy of Corona or COVID-19. So we would like to know what is your opinion on the contribution of Ayurveda in treating COVID-19 disease in the ongoing pandemic.
So COVID-19, as you know, it was unprecedented. Even the Spanish flu of 20th century fails before what we had. And in fighting this, I think the healthcare professions, in fact, every segment of Indian society contributed in this, worked very hard, especially the physicians, including Ayurvedic physicians, nurses, paramedical personnel, people who developed drugs, people who developed vaccines working in factories, engineers who are making all these, like masks, for example, or ventilators in their intensive care unit. So if you really look at the effort that which has gone into it and the number of professions who have contributed, there are so many of them. I find it very difficult to quantify that one is so much. It is impossible to do that. Every one of them was indispensable as far as I am concerned. And they made a terrific job. That's why we could survive.
Sir, in same line, I want to ask one more thing. Like we always say that antibiotics or say discovery of penicillin and then various vaccines, they saved us from infectious diseases. So what was the role of traditional medicine in treatment of infectious diseases? Because we all know and experience that they have a lot of role in non-communicable diseases or diseases of the 20th century. But I would like to know what was the role of traditional medicine in infectious diseases?
You know, when you talk of infectious diseases, even before we talk about vaccines and drugs, we have to remember the greatest contribution came from public health. Am I audible? Can they hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Now, you know, in the Industrial Revolution in Britain, when that came, Liverpool, Manchester, that Lancashire area, there was very great explosive growth of cities. Municipal system simply broke down. And cholera, gastrointestinal diseases, dysentery, all these were, people were dying by the thousands. And there was no germ theory even. Nobody knew what was causing these diseases. And nutrition was very low. In fact, people became so dehumanized. There are very good descriptions of this. Mothers working overtime to make money. Their children would cry, so they would give them morphine, a preparation of morphine to keep them quiet. This was kind of brutalization of the society at that time. And then doctors were writing prescriptions. That's very interesting. The medical doctors in Lancashire, including Liverpool, they were all writing prescriptions for these sick people, which were totally ineffective. But common people there, good Samaritans as they call, they were not doctors. Some of them did not even have a school education, but they got together. They could not see these hundreds of people dying, dead bodies on the streets. And they said, we will go back to basics. That is sanitation. That is number one. Not defecation all over the place. Good clean water. 2 meals a day, a well-ventilated house. These were their principles. Everybody laughed at them, made fun of them, but they never gave up. They are anonymous people. And this movement of these good Samaritans, surprisingly, mortality from 70% it dropped to 20% in the areas where they were allowed to work. This opened everybody's eyes. That's where, first time in the history of medicine, common people, non-medical people, bringing a disease, an epidemic under control by non-medical means. That was the role of public health. Now that is where it started. Then came Jenner in the 17th century with the vaccine. There again, when he started practice in Gloucestershire as a fresh MBBS from London, smallpox was very common there. The mortality was extremely high. Almost 80% would die. But he noticed that the milkmaids in that small place, milkmaids were going around merrily distributing milk. So he asked them, how come you are doing this? They said, no, we don't get smallpox because we get this cowpox in our hand from cows. So when he asked the doctors, they made fun of him. They said, these illiterate women, you are listening to these people, how can you do that? They made fun of this. But he was a careful observer. He wrote to his professor, his teacher, not professor, John Hunter, who was a great surgeon. We honor him as the founder of scientific surgery. He was his teacher. So Jenner wrote a letter to Hunter. I am here surrounded by deaths all over. I cannot do anything. But these women, they are immune from this disease. But doctors don't. What do you think about this? So Jenner, he wrote a very cryptic letter. He said, my dear Jenner, why think? Why not experiment? That's a famous statement in medicine, history of medicine. So he started, that's the beginning of vaccination. But the vaccine, he started triumphantly. In fact, within a few years, he managed to send it to India. That's a story in itself, sending the vaccine to India. It's worth reading. I think medical students should study this. It took several attempts to send it a live vaccine to India. He was very keen. And finally it came. The first vaccination was done in Bombay by a man called Scott. But anyway, that was but vaccination became a science only in the 19th century with Pasteur, Koch. Back the germ theory was well established. They understood something about passive and active immunity. They got Nobel Prize, etc., etc. It came at that time. But these are prevention. But the treatment actually started in science, scientific treatment in medicine started only with penicillin, 1928, with Fleming. Until then, a cause to be identified and remove that cause. That is the way to treat. That whole thing was established only with penicillin. That is in 1928. And pre-penicillin days, practice of infectious disease in modern medicine was not satisfactory at all. I had 3 sisters who died of smallpox, of typhoid fever in 1940s. 2 of them were treated by modern medicine. There was no antibiotic at that time. Chloromazepine had not come. And one sister, she did not want modern medicine because her sisters had died. She wanted Ayurveda. That she also died. So I would say in the pre-antibiotic days, treatment of infectious disease was unsatisfactory in modern medicine, and it was equally unsatisfactory in traditional medicine. That is my experience.
Right, sir. So coming back to Ayurveda biology, we talked about, you gave us information on 3 projects and the details of those projects and their outcome. So we would like to know what are the next steps in following up the reported studies, or for example, genomic basis of dosha prakriti. Would they help in diagnosis and treatment of diseases, or how will it go ahead now?
I wished there was a good follow-up of a study like that. For example, I would like to know other geographical groups trying to replicate this study. Other parts of India, what we had done in this Udupi, Pune, Bangalore, that study that we had done. Could it be done in other centers in different parts of India? They corroborate these patterns. That never happened. We never got any project from it. Secondly, the genome-wide association studies associating specific diseases with doshas. There are no such studies. So there are lots of things like this. For example, we noticed these small numbers, 3,000 samples we took, and there we found that the percentage of Vada, Pitta, Kapha, the population, the demography, if you look at that, Pune, Bangalore, and Udupi, these 3 places, they are not identical. They are different. But the numbers are too small. We cannot generalize. But suppose this study, a purely demographic type of study, or epidemiologic study, whatever you call it. If you find that the proportion of these prakrtis is different in different parts of India, in Pune and Udupi, for example. Now, if you do that, suppose you find Pitta Prakriti is more common there. In Ayurveda, it is very specific. Pitta Prakriti is more prone to these diseases. Vata Prakriti is more prone. Now we can look for those diseases in these geographic areas. Does it corroborate? Now these are all outcomes of this, but no, I don't get any such projects from people. So there was no, the curiosity was not there, unfortunately. That's where I felt maybe it is something, even though I talk about it so many places I go and talk, but I was not able to arouse the curiosity of our young scientists. So I thought perhaps somebody like Bhushan might be able to do it.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. I have Ayurvedic biology coming in education. I think it is a very good hope, to bring more and more young people get connected with this, and then slowly they progress towards research. I can see, sir, here one more question from participant. It's interesting question, so I want to ask. Kalpana may not have seen it. It's in question box. Can the concept of Ayurvedic biology included in the syllabus of BA MS?
This is, I am not a person to answer this question because BA MS, I have very little to do with education in Ayurveda, so I shouldn't be answering that.
Yeah, with your permission, sir, I will try to answer that question.
Yes.
I think Ayurvedic biology must be part of BMS curriculum, because BMS curriculum has a basic concept paper, and when they study basic concept, they must study basic concept from all sides, not just basic concept given in Shastra. So Ayurvedic biology orientation right at that stage will open up students' inquisitiveness tremendously, and that will really help. So I am going to personally discuss this with the new chairman of the Medical Council for Traditional Medicine, and see that some component of Ayurvedic biology, at least by way of introduction, is included in the BAMS curriculum as well as becomes part of the MD curriculum as well. Because this must get into education, sir. I think because unless we bring the sensitivity and sensitization of these ideas right at the student stage, later on it is difficult to change that. That's what I feel. So thank you for allowing me to address that question, sir. Thank you.
No, I have observed one thing, that I used to go give talks in the annual day of Ayurvedic colleges. Many colleges I have gone and addressed. That gave me a chance to talk with the students very often. And they are actually very much excited by this. For example, the dosha prakriti, that kind of subject, they are very much interested in that. So I think the element of that would find a great welcome from that. That is my impression also.
Yes, sir. So there is good interest among Ayurveda physicians to learn immunology, molecular biology, and I think it is vice versa also. Medical students, for example, my daughter, they want to learn more about our traditional knowledge and Ayurveda. So this year, like these days, Dr. Patwardhan will agree with me, a lot of things are discussed about integrative healthcare, or a lot of discussions are on integrative healthcare, especially with COVID pandemic, like patient may be given standard care along with some homeopathy or Ayurveda medicine. So my question was, what about mainstreaming of Ayurveda in integrative healthcare or using it in public health?
Oh, Kalpana, this is our attempts to integrate these two systems has been going on since independence with several committees, committee and so on. We have been doing that. But I will tell you some of the observations. I am a friendly outsider. I should claim that I have no expertise in Ayurvedic education. But I am a friend of Ayurveda. My observation is the following. If you read the report of Shailaja Chandra, who was the first secretary of AYUSH, the government appointed her as a one-person committee. She studied the practice of Ayurveda all over India. It took 2 years. It's a classic report. If you read that, some of the observations have been disturbing. I have talked to her also. First of all, she says the syllabus, BAMS syllabus, 70% when she made that report is modern medicine and modern science. That is one. Second, which disturbed me, she says out of these 20,000 or so graduates coming out every year, with exceptions in Kerala and Karnataka, the great majority of them find employment in nursing homes. This is what she has written. Now, third, which I have observed, a few years ago, there was a scheme of the government announced that those who have BAMS, they have spent 5.5 years to get that degree. And they attend a course somewhere. I don't know the details. Course was 1 or 2 years, then they can get MBBS. I thought nobody would come forward. Why would anybody want to come? 5.5 years you have studied Ayurveda, you have a license to practice. Why would anybody want to spend another 1 or 2 years and get an MBBS? But to my utter surprise, there were thousands of people coming forward. That shows there is something wrong. What we are. So I feel that this is for the educationists to look at. I have no solution to this. But one thing I have observed, which I would like to make that observation. The basic science part, anatomy, physiology, biochemistry, etc. These are universal subjects. And modern medicine may take certain things from those, microbiology, pathology. These are very big sciences. Modern medicine, they will take certain things from that. Ayurveda, this is a commons. Ayurveda should take what they like from these sciences. There is nothing called an Ayurvedic physiology or modern medicine physiology. When I open the chest for a cardiac operation, I have no idea whether it's a man or a woman or a Christian or a Muslim. I don't know anything. The heart functions the same way, the same cardiac output, whether it is here, whether it is in England, anywhere. So it is universal. So that every discipline should take what they like. That is as far as the basic science part. But the real problem is the practice. Now, practice this, when I interact with Ayurvedic students, many of them say, sir, our problem is when we get our degree, we can't get a job. There is no job for us. Second, we don't know how to start a practice. We have no confidence. I go there and suppose a very sick patient comes, I don't know how I would treat. Dosha-based diagnosis and all that we teach. But a fresh BAMS graduate, he's not able to do it. He has no confidence. So he goes into a nursing home where he gets a good salary. This is what happens. So I feel the practice guidelines, this is the point I have made. It has been a cry in the wilderness. Nobody listens to it. But if you want to practice guidelines for these young doctors coming up, 20,000, for example, when common illnesses come to them, how should I treat them? How should I make a diagnosis? That is possible if you have practice guidelines. And this brings us to this whole question that we must have clinical trials. And clinical trials, WHO in 2000, Shailja Chandra attended that 21 years ago in Hong Kong. They have revised the guidelines for traditional medicine trials. They need not do randomized double-blind control trials. A patient can be his own control, like your bronchial asthma project. Patient is his own control. Similarly, the treatment may involve, it is not just one molecule that we are testing. But Ayurvedic treatment will involve a drug, it will involve panchakarma, dietary restrictions, several things will be there. All those can be there. That's a black box. They are not separated. That is accepted. Outcome indications are there, inclusion criteria, they are all the rest of them apply. Now, this was a liberalized way of doing this. If we do that, I see no reason why most of the common, in the general practice, for example, 80% of the illnesses can be treated. And this clinical trials, Ayurvedic, 3 hospitals, 200 cases they can get in 3 years. The protocol is made. No modern doctor need to be involved in this. The whole thing is done by Ayurvedic physicians. A statistician should be there to help them. So these trials are done. And based on the trial results, that a protocol is better. You write the guidelines. And that should be nationally issued, preferably by an autonomous body, not by the government. Because they need to approval for the government. There's no need for that. It should be a professional body, autonomous. And these guidelines are issued like the NICE in Britain. It's very effective. That should be all these BAMS doctors, they have got authority. And that is, where is the authority? Is the clinical trial. Clinical trial have shown that this is effective. This is safe. And that will be accepted. They will feel supported. They may not go to these nursing homes. It will be accepted. Other modern medicine doctors will accept. They may find that this is better than ours. There is evidence. Because we are in the era of evidence-based practice. When there is engineering, there is medicine, Ayurveda, everywhere people are going to insist. And even what we consider the ignorant people, they also understand this. So similarly, insurance companies, if you want reimbursement, you are more likely to get insurance payment if it is the national guidelines, you have observed that in your practice, a hospital or a doctor. So I think we should really work evidence-based Ayurveda. There is a much better chance of integrating with evidence-based other systems. And even the 20 years have passed since WHO meeting. If India is going to take this seriously, if you want some changes made in that, we can do it at the national level, like Chinese get things done. Here we have no voice there. So that we have a presence internationally, evidence-based practice of Ayurveda. This is not at all connected with Ayurvedic biology, but since you asked, I have said this.
Sir, it is very interesting, very important suggestion to have national guidelines. I remember under your guidance, we had done asthma project and you had given us guidance that we should develop some manual or guidelines for treatment of asthma. Right. And I think it is, to some extent, it is being done. It has been done by our Ayurveda collaborators.
So in fact, in that asthma project which you did, patient is his or her own control. We have no other control.
Yeah, actually, your asthma study is a landmark study, I would say, published in Journal of Ethnopharmacology. There, the whole system approach has been taken, and the results are really encouraging. Dr. Tanuja Nesri, I hope she is here, but as Kalpana is saying, she has worked forward for making these guidelines. But these guidelines also, sir, must be properly peer-reviewed and then published, so that, yeah.
Right.
There is one more question in question box. I think, Kalpana, you're not addressing the question. This is from Bimalendu, and Bimalendu is saying that metabolomic studies on Ayurvedic formulations need to be pinpoint cause and effect relationships and all. Sir, Bimalendu is Dr. Lakhotia's student who is also now continuing some studies on Ayurvedic medicines, So he is a Drosophila biologist. So that's one. And second question is, we talked about Ayurvedic biology in BAMS curriculum, and they are asking why not in MBBS curriculum also. I would say that all medical science curriculum actually, Ayurvedic biology, even pharmacy also, because this question is from Sanjay Sawant, who is pharmacy professor. So these are the concepts. I have learned from Ayurvedic biology concepts so much, and I can tell all of the participants that please go through this decadal vision as well as the publications of Dr. Valiathan in proceedings as well as in the other journals. You will get entirely different insights and your way to look at Ayurveda as well as to biology, both will change. Thank you.
Even NPTEL lectures are extremely informative and really good to listen to. Sir, questions, I was thinking of addressing them at the end. I think we will move on to our next question. So, sir, we would like to know about your current activities.
No, Kalpana, I had a fairly busy life, but now I have moved to the slow lane. So I have only two projects I take personal interest in Manipal. And one of them is, I had a combination of young people. Young means they are professors. But one of them is very good in cognitive studies. That is how it started. He worked in an institute in Korea for several years, cognitive studies. So he came one day after he joined and had a long discussion with me about the kind of studies that he had done. And he asked me, sir, can you use this in Ayurvedic research? That's how it started. Now, what we have done is two Ayurvedic formulations, Methi Rasayanas, that almost all the work that I have seen, the studies on Alzheimer, is using Methi Rasayanas. There have been several, including Vijayalakshmi Ravindran's well-known publication, PNAs in 2015. All of them, they have a model, animal model already produced of Alzheimer. And then they try this particular medication, Rasayana, and see the effect. But Rasayana, as you know, is essentially a preventive, strengthen the body, make it resistant to disease. It may have some collateral effect on treatment also, but the essential thing is a preventive, strengthening the body, protecting the body. So we have developed a model where we can test the preventive ability of these rasayanas, blocking the expression of this disease. That kind of a model. There is a project which is going on. It is funded by a private foundation. We could not get any funding from DBT and so on. So that is going on. It is going well. We are in collaboration. The preparations are made for us by Kotak Kalari Vaidhyashala. And the histopathology is done by NIMHANS, pathology department. And metabolomics, the molecular biology, cognitive studies, these are all done in Manipal. So there is a project like this which is going on. I'm very much involved. I'm a mentor of that project. And the second is a very interesting project. There is a long debate, more than 100 years, on Ashtanga Hridaya and Ashtanga Sagra. There are two texts. Were they composed by the same person? Or were they composed by father and son? or by two entirely different people. This kind of argument has gone on for a long time. Most of the debates are inconclusive. It will say A said this, B said this, and finally you take a majority of them and you say that is more likely. Then this is not scientific research. But today, in computational biology, computational linguistics, there are ways of doing this. That is, when we use language, for example, the way we use words, the way we use phrases, the punctuations that we use, in synonyms, the words that we prefer. There are a number of things like these which are individual specific. So it is something like you may say the DNA of language. There is something like that in computational linguistics. So I happen to, there is one Professor Achyut Shankar in Kerala University, is the professor of bioinformatics there. He's a musician also. I found in one of his publications, he is a great authority on Swali Tirunal, a great king composer. In fact, Jitendra Abhisheki from Pune, he has sung many of his songs. So this Swali Tirunal songs, there is a controversy whether all of them were composed by him or somebody else. And I found Achyut Shankar's group, they had done a very interesting study using this, what is called stylometry. That is the term for this particular branch of computational linguistics. So he has used that to study these songs and differentiate one from the other. So I called him and asked him. So he was very, very happy. He didn't know that there is a question like this. So I have a project with them. It is almost ended now. They are doing the actual computer analysis of this. And they're also using machine intelligence in this analysis to make it as objective as possible. So if you find the two texts that they are using, the entire text, they are digitized, that analysis is over. We have the entire text, Ashtanga Sangraha and Ashtanga there. And if you find that the difference is very great, that is easily made out, statistically valid, then you know these are two different people. We cannot say which Ashtanga is written by father or son. That kind of thing we cannot say, but we can say they are two different people. That work is, I think, maybe in another 3 months we'll complete. These are the two things that I'm doing.
Very innovative, computational linguistic. I think I heard this word first time, and I'm sure it is going to give us something very interesting.
Yes, I certainly hope so.
Now, sir, my last question is there. I remember 10 years back, I asked you same question, and down the line in 10 years, so many Ayurveda biology projects got developed and so many came up with very outstanding results also. So I would like to ask you my last question now. What is your future plan? If Ayurveda biology or...
Kalpana, I am 87. At 87, I have no plans. I have only a prayer. And the prayer is, Lord, let thy servant depart in peace. I would end with that, because we cannot make plans at this stage.
No, sir, of course, yes. I'm sure after 10 years, I'm going to have another interaction with you, and I'm sure there will be some outstanding outcomes that time. So, there are some questions. So, sir, if we could take some of the questions.
Yeah, sure. Yes.
So, there is one question from Dr. Kumar S.K. Mohan. And then there is a question even from Madan Thangavellu on clinical trial testing ancient cold remedy for COVID-19 is open across the UK. So it's good to know that Ayurveda treatments are tried abroad in other countries also. There is some question on Pashu Ayurveda. So,
Kalpana, I have screened questions, because what you are reading is from chat box. people
Yes.
have put questions in the question and answer area. I have screened them. Many of the questions are related to herbal medicines, plant medicinal plant drugs and all. So let me tell you that Professor Valiathan may not address those questions because his
That's
focus in
right.
Ayurvedic biology is basic principles, scientific research, and insights into the Ayurvedic biology. So those questions we are skipping, So other than that, if I can see a few questions, one question is if we can define Prakriti genomics, then is there a chance to identify Ayurvedic biologicals like modern medicine is using in cancer treatment nowadays? So all these questions are related to there are several questions, sir. Means the question and answer box is full with questions that shows inquisitiveness and interest of participants in this. But addressing all the questions will be challenging, and most importantly, many of the questions are related to herbal medicines. So I'm not really putting them directly to you. I hope you, in case if you would like to comment on anything related to herbal medicine standardization, because there are many questions related.
No, I would, the Ayurvedic biology, we have not really addressed herbal drugs at all, because there is already a tremendous amount of work. There are whole institutes working on them. Private sector is working on them. So the amount of the research done, the money spent in herbal drug research over the last 100 years from Radha Chopra's time, it is so great. Our Ayurvedic biology is a minuscule, very, very small area that is addressing concepts, for example, like dosha prakriti. That kind of, for rasayana, when you give beneficial effects are reported, what is responsible for it? Is it some immunologic change? We can easily measure this today. 50 years ago, when modern immunology did not exist, molecular biology did not exist, this research could not be done. But today we can. When we have those resources in India, scientists interested in this area, that's what we have done here. So what little energy we have, what little money we have, we spend on that. In fact, in our website itself, Ayurvedic Biology, I have written very clearly that drug-related research we will not fund it.
Sir, there is one interesting question by Dr. Nyaneshwar Varude, who is presently in Japan. He asked, do you think the modern biology tools are sufficient to answer the questions we wish to address in Ayurveda?
No, Ayurveda, as in my Ayurvedic biology, that towards Ayurvedic biology, if you read the last paragraph, Ayurveda cannot be reduced to experimental science, scientific concepts and all that. There is something beyond that in Ayurveda. So the Ayurveda, the whole reality is not comprehended by scientific projects alone, that we should understand. If you read Charaka Samhita especially, it is not, when it comes to Varpada's books, yes, that is only helping a practicing physician. He himself says that. People are very busy now. There is no time for philosophy. He writes like that. But it is very different with Charaka. For example, he talks about death. Is there something called fate, destiny? Because the patient, when he comes to the doctor, he or his family, they are not interested in the histopathologic diagnosis at all. The only question is, what will happen to me? That's the question. Now that immediately, a physician is confronted by death. What is going to happen? Now this is a deeply philosophical question. Now, when you come to these in Ayurveda, that all is comprehended. When you read Charaka, that is the whole of Ayurveda. You cannot reduce many of them to experimental projects. So I have no illusion that Ayurvedic biology, you can study the whole of Ayurveda. You can't. You can study a whole lot of things. You must, which you cannot study with anything else. But you cannot comprehend the whole of Ayurveda. That I think we should understand.
Yes, sir. Everyone will agree with me. There are so many fundamental concepts like Agni and Agni Mandya and other things. People are trying to address them with microbiome and many more studies, but we still need more technology to address some of these principles and say many of these unsolved questions in Ayurveda. So I think because of the time constraint, we will not be able to take more questions. But thank you for asking so many questions and showing so much interest. I will share some of these questions with Professor Valiathan, and maybe we'll get back to you sometimes. This communication, or say this conversation, has left us spellbound. I'm sure everybody enjoyed it. Enjoyed thoroughly this intellectual feast. So Ayurveda biology or any other modern medical science. So the common goal is to bring back health from all the pathies, So I would like to end my conversation by saying, Sarvepi sukhinas santu, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kashit dukkha bhagana. So thank you so much, sir, for...
Thank you very much. I greatly enjoyed the interaction, meeting with old friends. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Dr. Patwardhan.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
I request my colleague, Dr. Preeti, for formal vote of thanks. Sir, we would like to continue this interaction. Over to you, Dr. Preeti.
So first of all, I would like to thank Professor Valiathan ji for sharing his thoughts. And as always, sir, it was a pleasure to listen to you. I also thank Professor Bhushan Patwardhan ji for gracing this occasion and sharing some interesting memories. I also thank Dr. Kalpana Joshi for conducting this interview and making this session so interesting. And we look forward to more to the next interaction which ma'am has proposed. So thank you all, and thank you, Professor Valiathan ji. Namaste.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.